Hello, my name is Stuart. This is my 3-year studying Japanese update video, primarily through the AJATT/MIA method. So I'm going to talk about what I've done and some of the stuff I've incorporated into my method that has been really good, but I haven't heard a lot of other people talk about. So I think I'm different from the majority of AJATTers in that I've only done about 1.5 to 2 hours of studying a day since I started, because I work full-time and I have a wife and a kid and keep a pretty busy schedule and other stuff in the evenings as well. But with my job, I have been fortunate that I can always do maybe 30 minutes to an hour of Japanese at work in between working. So my goal for Japanese has always been to have conversations with Japanese people, and so not really focusing on reading. So as a result of that goal, during my limited study time, I currently don't allocate any time to active reading. But if I had the time, I would like to, because I do feel like it trellises your other skills really well. You're listening and you're speaking. But when I am living in Japan, obviously it's useful to read things without really struggling through them. So I would like to work on that at some point. But just with the goal in mind so far of speaking to people, this is what I've done. So I started studying 3 years ago. I think I went to r/learn Japanese and just saw a lot of people mention Tay Kim as really good and free. So I just started going through lessons from Tay Kim. Shortly after that, I started sentence binding, both from Tay Kim and other grammar resources I used online. I think I'd watched like a Benjiro YouTube channel video on sentence binding, which just made a lot of sense to me, and so I started doing it pretty regularly. And I actually used Quizlet because I had used it in college and I was really familiar with it instead of Anki. So on Reddit, I saw a lot of people mention the SRS, and just in doing the lessons on Tay Kim, I kind of felt like the forgetting curve that the SRS is based on to be true in my experience. And even in my experience, like learning hiragana and katakana, like I felt like that's how memory worked, and so that was something that I wanted to do. But I didn't really start like truly SRSing at that point because I wasn't sure what software I wanted to use or what settings to use. And since I didn't know that many words, just reading my list on Quizlet, like I was pretty much just using it as a list that was working at that time. But I knew like I'd eventually need a real SRS when the list got bigger, because going through the whole thing every day or every couple days was getting to be a lot more time. So after a few hundred sentence cards in Quizlet, I started to feel like I was just learning the meaning of that sentence and then not being able to recognize the I+1 word in it in a different sentence. So yeah, at that point, for better or worse, I switched from sentence cards on the front to just vocab cards on the front, like just the word and then the definition and the reading and like example sentences on the back. And there's pros and cons to that, but I feel like I've been pretty aware of the pitfalls of it and that it's worked out for me for the most part. So something that I do to avoid like the major con with using word cards on the front is like I'll always go to Jisho and like look at all the example sentences, and like if say the word's only used in one context and like 12 out of 14 example sentences, I'll just put like one typical example of those 12 on the back of the card, and I'll put the audio of that directly so that it plays directly whenever I flip to the back of the card. And if it's a really long sentence and say it's a verb, I'll just put like the typical direct object if there's like one or two, and then the verb, not like the whole sentence. I feel like that gives you the ability to use that word just as much as reading the whole sentence. I do that. I do a lot of picture cards, like for nouns, like Yoga's talked about before, just like a noun on the front and then a picture on the back and a reading if you need it. And yeah, so doing stuff like that, I feel like the vocab cards have worked out for me pretty good. So during my first year studying, Continued to do Quizlet and Takeham and other online resources, mostly for grammar stuff. Was getting new words either from grammar resources or from anime I was watching with English subs for fun, or like from Benjiro's videos on italki. I was still going through those. And obviously during that time I was watching videos and reading different opinions on how to learn Japanese, and just weighing those against my own experience. And I was also spending time volunteering at an English hour at my local college with international students and kind of bouncing off ideas from their experience. And so during that time, I really gravitated towards Matt versus Japan's ideas and really resonated with a lot of the stuff that he said. So such as made for learners content is not going to get you to sound natural or be able to make natural sentences. You have to do a lot of listening to sound natural and pick it up subconsciously. Like, you can't pick it up consciously constructing sentences in your head that are going to sound natural to a native. Outputting doesn't really help you early on. Writing is not very helpful early on. The I+1 concept I really like. Learning about the language, learning knowledge about the language doesn't really help you. It's more of a subconscious activity. The JLPT is not a very good test, so on and so on. But one main thing that Matt said that didn't really match my experience was immersing hardcore from day one. And in my experience and thinking about it since then, I still believe that it's not super useful. And so, like, in my understanding, the point of the immersion is to flesh out the hook or the dictionary entry that you've made for a word. And so you flesh that out with real life immersion, and you subconsciously pick up more context around that word and real life usage of that word. But by and large, you're rarely going to hear a word for the first time in the wild, look it up, and remember it for a long time if you don't put it in the SRS, unless it's something that, like, it's content that you always watch. But by and large, the immersion does not give you the initial dictionary entries, the initial hooks. So let's say I knew the 1,000 most common words in Japanese from just doing SRS, and I started my immersion. So what the immersion is doing is helping me flesh out all of the hooks, all the dictionary entries. It's giving me real context and more flesh on those words but it's only doing that for the 1,000 words that I've made and studied in the SRS. So as I'm immersing, there's a ton of my immersion time that's spent hearing words that I have no hook for, that I'm really getting no value out of. But let's say that I started immersing from knowing 4,000 words in Anki with example sentences, and then I start my immersion. How long does it take to get hooks fleshed out for the first 1,000 words? It takes the same amount of time that it would have taken if I had started immersing earlier. But all the time that I would have spent hearing words that I had no hooks for, that I was getting nothing out of that time, now a lot of that time is being utilized to flesh out the other 3,000 words that I learned. So that was just my experience and what I felt was best for me, especially with the limited time to study that I had. And in my case, experiencing just the pain of early immersion when you can't understand anything and it's really frustrating. I think when a lot of people go through that, they just conclude, okay, immersion doesn't work, and I'm just going to keep studying grammar and like keep studying for the JLPT. But in my experience, when I experienced that and still believing that immersion was key to getting good and like actually progressing in a natural way, it pushed me to really hit the vocab and hit Anki really hard for the next like 6 months to a year. And so I think it worked out pretty well, especially given like how little time I had to study. So around that time that I was really thinking about that, hit the 1 year mark, and I went to Japan for 10 days. I had 1,000 words in Quizlet at that point, and I came back with a healthy dose of that I really suck motivation. And at this point, what I had experienced learning about immersion, I was totally convinced that I needed more vocab. So from that point, I did 20 new words a day for the next six months, which people have done more, but yeah, I was totally convinced, and so I really hit it. At that point also, I was rarely seeing grammar that I didn't know. So at that point, I stopped grammar and take him, having almost finished it, or maybe I did finish it. I also switched from Quizlet to Anki like a week before I went to Japan, just because it was getting too big to go through the list every day or like every 2 or 3 days. At that point, I was getting most of my new words from anime. I used a website called Animelon. I'll put the link down, but you can toggle Japanese subs and English subs, and they also have a script over to the side that will display either English or Japanese, whatever you want, and you can click on words and it'll instantly display like the G show or whatever you want. And so that was good, as I was trying to phase in more J subs and more no subs, to be able to toggle on and off. Like whenever it was an easier part, I would switch out to English subs or switch out to all the subs, and when it was the hardest part, I could have more subs. And so yeah, I would just watch anime until I got like 20 new words for the day, and just like store them, and then like make 140 cards on the weekend. And yeah, as it kept going, obviously I needed to watch more and more anime to get to the 20 words. So maybe it started out like 10 minutes, and then over the 6 months maybe phased up to like 2 episodes, like 40 minutes. And the anime I was watching at that time was like Clannad, Anohana, what's the other one? Kanon, which is like very similar to Clannad, and K-On, so like a bunch of cards that have like K-On pictures on them. So during that 6 months after I got back from Japan, I probably transitioned from mostly English subs to mostly J subs, depending on the difficulty of the content. And I felt like the English sub stage was useful just to see like how Japanese constructs the same thought with completely different structured sentences, or like completely different words. So, but as I was starting to get those, I was transitioning to more J subs and more no subs. So at the end of a year and a half, I had like 4K to 5K words in Anki. I was doing more and more anime. I was needing to watch longer to find a bunch of words I didn't know. So I was probably doing like 30 to 40 minutes at that point. And then over the next 6 months, from 1.5 years to 2 year mark, I was definitely doing 40 to 50 minutes of anime with either J subs or no subs. I cut back on my words per day from 20 just because I was getting burned out on Anki, and I was doing like 50 plus minutes on Anki a day. So I reduced to like 18 words a day, then 15, and then I think by the 2 year mark I was doing like 12 or 10. And also on the 2 year mark, I had been gradually moving this way, but I really kind of hard switched at that point to pretty much all the cards I was making was audio front cards, where just the front is the audio of a word, and then the back was the kanji, the reading, the example sentences. Because I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, but a lot of the cards I was adding, I already knew the characters so well, so I could guess at the meaning pretty well, and then the real meaning was like just like a little nuance different than what I had guessed. So the card was only getting me this much distance, and then if I heard the word in immersion, I wouldn't be able to recognize it. And so yeah, I switched to pretty much a majority audio only cards. Sometimes I would make 2 cards, like one that was normally just the kanji on the front and the other that was audio on the front, if it was like a less common kanji, or like I only had 1 or 0 other words that use that kanji, but I never did RTK, so Anki was my only source for remembering kanji, so I had to have something to be able to recognize it, but yeah, I'll talk about RTK later. So that pretty much brings me up to the 2-year mark, and so at the 2-year mark, I was really understanding a lot with J subs on, so I switched to no subs only pretty much, and so I did 30 minutes a day of immersion with no subs, and often like maybe another 20 minutes of harder content to find words that I didn't know. So I was probably doing like 5 to 10 new words a day from the 2 to the 2.5-year mark, because I also got busy with a bunch of other stuff during that time period. Okay. As for content, I pretty much switched from anime to just YouTube, just because it's so much more efficient per your time spent listening to get somebody speaking continuously, and you can find someone who speaks at an I+1 speed and an I+1 content level, and if it's just one person talking, you can really follow their argument a lot better, and it's really hard to get lost for very long, versus anime where there's spaces and at times it's super simple and you have dialogue and jokes that you miss a lot of stuff of. But with YouTube, it's free and there's so much that you can just find way more efficient content. And I've got a playlist with a lot of the channels that I've listened to over time that I can link down below, and you can go and see that at the beginning a lot of the channels were people speaking a lot slower and more simply, and like a lot of the first ones were like about language learning, and then the more recent stuff is like a lot more variety of topics and a lot faster speech. First stuff was pretty slow. So that's pretty much what I did for immersion and Anki up to the 2.5-year mark. At that point, that was December 2019, and I took the JLPT N2 just because I didn't know what my plans were going to be for moving to Japan, if I was going to need that certification or not. But because I knew I probably wouldn't use it, and I don't think the JLPT is like that good a measure of ability, especially for my primary goal of becoming conversational. I didn't want to change my studying very much to try to pass it. At that point, I had like 8,000 words in Anki, and they only recommended like 6,000 to pass the N2, so I knew I was fine there. I hadn't been doing any reading, so to make sure I passed that, I started doing like 20 to 30 minutes of active reading a day for like 2 months before the test, maybe two to 3 months. And I just used sample JLPT reading sections from the website Japanese Test for You, which worked for me because it gives you actual practice with what the test questions are going to be like. So yeah, it was just really good material for what I needed, because I wasn't probably not looking to continue reading immersion after the JLPT, because I knew I wasn't going to have time. But so I did some reading to prepare. I also read through on the same site. They had a list of grammar points for the N2, and just reading through and finding ones that I didn't think I would get right on the test. I probably made like 40 Anki cards related to grammar points out of that. Yeah, so just doing those couple things on top of my normal studying, I passed with like a 120 out of 180. I really struggled on the listening, which really pissed me off because I practiced listening way more over the past 6 months than anything else, and I had only done reading for like 2 months, and I scored really high on reading. So at that point, at 2.5 years, I knew that I was really improving just from immersing listening, just like MIA says, but I knew I was limited by how much time I was doing it because it was only 30 minutes a day. And like watching some of Matt's interviews with other AJATTers, I know relative to most people, I was doing very little listening. So at that point, I decided to bump up from 30 minutes a day to an hour a day of listening. And I continued that from the 2.5 to the 3-year mark. And yeah, I feel like I've been improving twice as fast, which is obvious because I double the time that I was immersing. Makes sense. So as far as Anki over the past 6 months, I haven't been doing very much. Like the 2 months before the JLPT, when I started doing reading, I pretty much stopped adding new cards at that point. And since the JLPT, I've slowly ramped up the Anki, but it's been really hard to go from doing less cards to more. Plus, I know that the cards that I'm learning now are a lot less common than the ones I was doing when I was adding 20 a day. And so it's just hard to get motivated, but I'm starting to gain momentum. And so now at the 3-year point, I only have like 9,100 cards, and it was like 8,000 when I took the JLPT. So it's a pretty slow 6 months for Anki. So at the present, at the 3-year point, looking back over the past 6 months, I've spent like 30 to 35 minutes a day repping and doing an hour of active listening. And I think compared to most AJATTers, my Anki to immersion ratio is pretty low. But at this point for me, I still believe it's easier to maintain my vocab through Anki than reading, because I have to put in a lot of reading hours to get to that critical mass where it's more efficient to maintain vocab through reading. And at this point, I just don't have the time to invest that many hours. And so for me now, it's more efficient to keep doing Anki like I am. Also right now, I do feel I'm limited in my listening a good bit by unknown words. So I would like to keep adding words to Anki, although I know the main thing that I need to do to improve is still more immersion. Yeah, so that brings most of what I've done up to the present. And now I'm going to touch on RTK, Monolingual Transition, Pitch Accent before I wrap up with my plans going forward. So RTK. So I never did RTK or anything to learn kanji specifically or kanji components. I know some components just from seeing them over and over again, but for the most part, kanji are just pictures to me. And yeah, similar ones do get confused, but not really that much. And if you just keep repping them and miss the card until you get it right, eventually you will learn it. And so I feel like it's kind of just like a time trade-off. Either you spend the time up front doing the RTK, or you spend more time later in Anki just missing the cards until you get it right. And I feel like probably the time trade-off is pretty small, and what I've done has worked for me. But maybe in the future I would want to go back and do RTK or learn kanji components another way if I'm wanting to write. I don't know. For pitch accent, I haven't done very much. I've just been going through Dogen's series very slowly, and there's a deck, a pitch accent deck that you can get from Dogen's Patreon that follows his lessons, and I'll usually just watch like 2 videos a couple of times and then add the cards to my deck, or I guess I have it in a separate deck, and start studying those cards. And I'll usually like add a note onto the card as to what role that particular word corresponds to, or what exception to a role. And so I've been doing that slowly over the past like 6 months or a year, and I feel like it's made a difference. Like I can recognize some words, like I know what the pitch accent, and if it's like different, like I can recognize that if I'm hearing like an English speaker or something. But just trying to be conscious of it when you're listening and pay attention to it, I feel like is just as necessary as actually learning it from Dogen or from the cards or whatever. I'd definitely like to do more pitch accent in the future as time allows, even though it's not totally in line with my goal of wanting to communicate in Japanese verbally. But I just think it's kind of a cool feature of the language and I enjoy doing it. So yeah, I want to keep it up as I can. So monolingual transition. So I haven't done a monolingual transition at all. Since I don't read at all, it would be really difficult. And also I feel like my cards are working. Like they give me that hook that I need to be able to hear the word in immersion and flesh out the meaning. And just like there are pitfalls of doing word cards versus sentence cards, I feel like there are pitfalls of not doing a monolingual transition that if you're aware of them, you can do some upfront work and kind of avoid the negative aspects. So like, for example, I never trust the English definition in Jiso. Like I'll always look at the kanji and look at the example sentences and sometimes look at the Japanese definition and really judge and evaluate the English definition and kind of tweak it or throw it out completely if I don't think it's good. And a lot of times I can make one that more precisely gets to the meaning of it than what they have listed by just doing a little bit more work up front. So like this one, like if you take the English definition at face value, favorite doesn't really capture what this is, but if you look at the characters and the example sentences, you can get something better, maybe like this. And so in the process of figuring that out, it really sticks in your head and I think gives you a really good hook to be fleshed out in immersion. And so yeah, I haven't done a monolingual transition. Maybe I will in the future if I have more time for reading, but for now I don't think I'm missing out on that much. For output, I haven't done like anything, just talked to some international students at my local college a couple times, but basically nothing. Still feel like I'm at the point where it's not super helpful, but maybe in a year or so it will be, I don't know. So going forward for the next year, I'm not sure what my timeline with Japan is going to be or how much time I'm going to have to study anymore with coronavirus and everything, but when I can study, I'd like to, number one, do more listening immersion. I feel like that's still the key for me to get better. Two, I'd still like to keep adding words to Anki. I'd like to do more pitch accent, and if I do get more time, I'd definitely like to do reading immersion. But overall, I'm really happy with the progress that I've made and most of the choices that I've made. If I could change one thing, it probably would be in the first year only learning 1,000 vocab words. I just feel like I needed more to get off the ground and I had the time to do more, but I kind of misallocated it. But I just didn't know, and everyone's got to figure this out. No beginner really knows. You just got to listen and try to do your best. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how learning Japanese is going, and I'm still enjoying it. And I feel like how my progress now is almost completely just how much I immerse, period. And the immersion is both challenging and fun. I'm really in that sweet spot, and I can notice improvement like every month or two. So yeah, big shout out to Yoga and Matt and Cats and the whole community for making videos and sharpening each other and learning off each other. Keep at it, boys. God bless.